Hello, and welcome to a special episode of the Atheist Vanguard. I'm Jamie Boone, and to my right, regular viewers will recognize Derek Hawk of Atheist Vanguard. That's this show. And to my left, we have special guest Christy Powell. How you doing today, Christy?
Hey, not too bad.
Christy, you're involved with the ACA in that you are the host of Secular Sexuality, and you've been involved with us for a few months. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got involved and what your involvement entails?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do host Secular Sexuality every Thursday at 7. Check us out. But, you know, coming from the outside, I guess from what I understand, there was just talk of wanting to do a show about gender and sexuality and feeling like if there's one thing that religion definitely gets its hands in almost every person, it is specifically those types of issues. And so they were interested in looking and doing a show about gender and sexuality, and so they were looking for a sex therapist, and I happened to be one with Valence Counseling, and so they tracked me down, and you know, initially that was kind of it. That was my involvement with the ACA, was coming in and doing that show every week. But over the past year, as I've, you know, had a chance to join the Facebook groups, to be on Discord, to get to know people, I've really fallen in love with the, you know, the community parts of the Atheist Community of Austin.
Oh, well, I'm glad you're feeling a part of the community.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And Derek, I didn't leave you out. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really good. How are you doing?
I'm doing marvelously, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
I can't complain. Well, I can, but I won't.
Yeah, at least right now.
Right now.
It's as soon as we're done, that's all I'm going to
Oh, Lord, you're going to get in here full.
So this is a part of the continuing series where we break down parts of a phone interview that our producer got with Pastor Tommy McMurtry of the New Independent Fundamentalist Baptist Church. Before we get into our next clip, though, I'd like to read a brief statement from Ben Esteville, our producer. I, Ben Esteville, by interviewing a pastor of the NIFB movement, in no way intend to endorse the views or values expressed in the interview. My intent for this interview is to gather the statements and views of Pastor McMurtry and the NIFB movement so that they can be discussed and responded to. I believe the best way to achieve real change is through civil conversation. We should combat ideas, not people. And with that, unless producer is about to tell me that I've forgotten something, let's roll the first clip.
Do you think the LGBT community has made a choice to go down that road, or do you think people are just born the way they're born and these are the actions that they're taking because it's natural, because they've been born that way? Or do you think it's a choice?
No, they were not born that way.
So you think it's an active choice?
Yeah, they absolutely were not born that way. You know, because we call them reprobates a lot. You know, you'll hear me use the term reprobate when talking about them. A reprobate is someone who has rejected. But one trait of a reprobate you see throughout the Bible is these were people who knew the truth. It says in Romans 1:18, says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them." And I'm not going to read that whole passage to you, but every legitimate LGBT, not everyone who identifies as that, but everyone who is an actual full-blown sodomite, is somebody who knew the truth at one point in their life, and they rejected it. Every member of the LGBT community is somebody who God loved at one time, God wanted to save, God died, and He paid for every one of their sins. But at some point in their life, and I can't possibly know when this was, they rejected God, and then God rejected them. And the Bible says God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. So as a result of whatever wickedness, and it could be any number of things that they were involved with that caused them to reject God, but whatever it was, part of their punishment is God kind of took away that natural instinct we have. For example, it is completely natural for you and me, if we put our hand on a hot stove, to immediately move our hand away because it burns. That damages us. You and I we're going to just naturally pull away from something like that. A reprobate, they don't have that. They desire to do things that are harmful. That's why you have many people who cut themselves. That's not normal. You know, they're abusive with themselves. Bible calls them abusers of themselves with mankind. They do things that are repulsive. You and I are naturally repulsed at the sight of poop. You know, we don't want to be anywhere near that. But when someone's given over to a reprobate mind, they now desire things that are harmful, things that are repulsive to normal people. And same-sex, you know, activity is repulsive to the normal man and woman. But because they've been given over to a reprobate mind, something that causes diseases, something that is gross, something that causes great harm, it's actually attractive to these people. And that is part of their punishment for rejecting God. So they were not born that way. That is a lie. They still haven't discovered the gay gene, and they never will, because there's no such thing.
I want to talk.
They had a chance, and they lost.
Sounds like you think they're rebels.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. I don't know, Derek, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, there's so much wrong with what has gone on there. This is the type of thinking that I grew up with that made me lead to spending the majority of my life hating myself. I was born this way. I've always felt this way. And I grew up loving Jesus. I love Jesus with all my heart. But it was these feelings that were embedded with me that made me question everything, even my own relevance in life. Before and after I came out, my hand burnt on a stove. There's no change in that. It's just really sad, and just really, it hurts my heart to hear people still think this way, still think about people like all of us.
Yeah, I have to say, this is not my first time listening to this clip, but it definitely hit me, you know, a little bit, like sitting in the studio, sitting with you two good folks, and just recognizing how incredibly hurtful a lot of that language is. Now, I mean, we can respond to the ideas and the facts of what he says and the truth of all of that, but I think it is worth taking just a brief moment to acknowledge how that resonates emotionally, to hear that kind of language discussed about you know, me, myself, but then so many people that I love. I hear where you're coming from.
Yep.
Yeah, it's certainly this level of us, them sort of othering, right? Because in a previous clip, actually in a previous episode, which you should go back and watch if you haven't seen, he talks about not encountering and avoiding, you know, any interactions with, you know, in his words, homos, which just deepens the divide, the separation that he has between, you know, LGBTQIA folks. And it enables more of this sort of cycle of like, oh yeah, thinking of people as something other than people like you, because they're different. They're given over to a reprobate mind. I've been saved by God, so it's entirely different. So of course, you know, as he's talked about before.
I think we have a unique opportunity here to really, like what Christy was saying, to really address the ideas and not the people, because in the past, any type of these conversations would end up in an epic cussing match. And right now we have an audience. Right now I'm speaking to the people of this church and of the leader of this church, whereas I'm not much different from you. I love life. I love people. I find poop gross too. These ideas, these feelings were there. They were put there by me. Why some God? I don't know. And it doesn't really matter. What matters is that I was not given this choice like you were given a choice to become a Christian. This is totally not apples to oranges. It's totally different. And if you are on a mandate to become more Christ-like, there needs to be compassion. There needs to be a willingness to understand each other and eventually acceptance. We can't go along this path anymore of just labeling somebody as a degenerate and gross. I understand that there's things about other cultures that are different. There's things about the gay culture that make me uncomfortable, and I'm still working through this, as my friend here has witnessed. Wow. I'm a prude, but still, it's compassion. It's compassion. It's Christ-like. Christ said, when I came, did you welcome me? When I was in prison, did you visit me? When I was hungry, did you feed me? Not, if I had a list, did you stone me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
writing off just 10, 20, 90% of the population, depending on, where you draw the line or what he finds acceptable. But, as we kind of dive in and start to break all of this down, it does become incredibly apparent that he just doesn't experience or spend time around gay folks because a lot of his argument starts to fall apart. I mean, whether we look at homosexuality, whether we look at queerness or however we want to label it as moral, immoral, right, wrong, indifferent, it simply just doesn't work the way that he's discussing it. He talks about people at some point in their life making a choice. So let's start off with the question of whether or not an infant, whether a young child is able to make that choice, and at what point sort of the age of accountability is a term that a lot of modern day Christians use to kind of conceptualize that concept of being able to choose God or being able to choose sin, getting to a certain point where you have the opportunity to make those decisions. I don't know where the age of accountability starts. Mm-hmm. I don't know that there is one. I mean, it's kind of this really nebulous concept, but if he's suggesting that there's a choice involved, ostensibly that choice would happen at some point in your lifetime and not universally around, 12 to 15 when your sexuality starts to kind of kick in.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right? So I have heard so many scared parents who come to my counseling practice or different things who are worried that their kid might be queer in some way. And with the folks that I work with, that's generally I'm so concerned about their experience growing up. It's not from a please fix them, but I've seen that too. Mm-hmm. And so it makes me wonder why there are so many parents of a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old. Usually it's a little boy who is behaving in feminine ways and freaking out his dad. That's a very common thing. But why would that happen if this child hadn't already made the choice to reject God forever? Right. So that feels very confusing to me. And it also makes me wonder why you don't have more people who are 55, 70, all of a sudden rejecting God and becoming gay. That's not to say that there aren't folks who wait until that time in their life to come out or to suggest that sexuality isn't somehow or to some level fluid. But more and more as we have this increasingly welcoming society, you don't see that last-minute deathbed after 60 years of marriage type of coming-out experience and that kind of story. And even in those incidences with those people, you very rarely will find anybody who says, oh, yeah, no, I just became gay last week. I've been straight, and then I was just really pissed off at God, and now I love having sex with men. I want to be respectful to our audience. And so just that life cycle really doesn't hold up, regardless of whether homosexuality is right, wrong, or anything else. What he's describing just doesn't resonate with the experience of any gay person I've ever met in my life.
And we see the opposite, actually, whereas you have somebody who has petitioned against the gay community, gay rights, and comes out to be gay themselves, and usually in some controversial back room.
After having been kind of forced out in some controversy. Yeah, I mean, that's, I don't want to get too heady or esoteric about all this, but it really broke my heart as he's talking about self-harm and these different things. because what he clearly doesn't understand is that self-injurious behavior, cutting, doing these different things, is usually a way of releasing pain. You know, you cause physical pain as a way of helping your body to sort of mirror what's going on mentally.
Yeah.
It's a way of self-soothing. You know, that sounds very counterintuitive, but it's a reality. It's self-soothing and, you know, certainly dangerous and concerning and not generally healthy behavior. I want to acknowledge that very firmly. But it's a defense mechanism that people who are hurting utilize, and they are often hurting because of this self-hatred, because of this internalized homophobia, because of this kind of rhetoric.
Right, and he's saying it's actually a symptom or a side effect or a part of a punishment from God.
Yeah. I mean, people don't cut themselves because they're gay. Gay people cut themselves because of our society, because of the things that we say to them, because of the things that are coming from pulpits and everywhere else.
Yeah. Well, there's that, and then there's sort of two other parts of this that I think of what Pastor McMurtry is saying that don't really match with reality, which is, one, there are gay folks that were never Christian, that never knew God at all, and they're gay. So,
or had the opportunity to know God. Unreached peoples and these different things.
And it's sort of, if it's a punishment from God, that doesn't comport with the things that he says about the God that he believes in. There's also almost the mirror image of that, which is that why are there non-believers that are not gay, right? Matt is straight and was, he got saved and he's out there being straight and attracted to women and not men. Why is it that only some people...
some sinners turn out to be gay sinners.
Yeah. Only some people that reject God's love, that knew it in the way that Pastor McMurtry knows it, only some sinners receive this punishment. God unevenly metes out justice, which would be imperfect justice. The hypothesis, if you will, of Pastor McMurtry's description of the way the world works doesn't match the way the world works. It's not an accurate description of reality.
Can I bring up one more point that I kind of found interesting was that, so we are all given the truth, according to Tommy and Romans, we are all given the truth by God, and that we find everything similarly disgusting and repulsive when it comes to same sex and whatnot. As far as I know, I might be, reaching out, but a lot of straight guys like lesbian porn.
Yeah, that was actually something I was going to mention as well.
They love the lesbian porn.
Yeah, and we can dive into some of the complexities of that, but it's couched in this idea that people are naturally going to be repulsed by the things that are bad for them, right? And this is the perfect example of the naturalistic fallacy, this idea that because poop smells bad, that it's morally wrong. And yeah, we do understand that our bodies have evolved and survived long enough to reproduce because of these certain feelings of disgust. Disgust is a part of our natural order of our body. If something is going to make us sick, we likely don't enjoy the smell of it, the taste of it, these different things. However, as evolved creatures, as thinking, discerning, wise human beings, we have a responsibility to do more than just use the ick factor as an understanding of how we should treat one another. Because by his rationale, we should also be repulsed by and shunning people with physical disabilities, people who have a skin color that's different from our experiences, what we've been raised by. I mean, there's overwhelming scientific evidence that shows that our guts, frankly, have shits for brains.
And according to Tommy in a past episode, kids with mental and emotional disabilities as well.
Yeah.
To be stoned.
Yeah.
Did you ever see it was a news release from Africa where they were actually, one of the officials was, and this is before they made homosexuality illegal, and they were actually campaigning for death and life imprisonment. And he had a ice cream, and he was talking about gay sex, and he was like, had a chocolate ice cream cone. He was like, they lick the poo poo, and he's imitating it. This is kind of the same type of irrational and hateful thinking of what homosexuality is. I know I've known a lot of people that were extremely passionate and sexual, but had no intercourse whatsoever. Just like regular sex, there's a connection that we all have with each other, whether they be male or female. And it's just whether you want to label it some spiritual love connection, soulmate or whatnot, but we all have it. We all experience it. Just like people experience the Holy Spirit. I experience it with certain stories, with certain uplifting tales of heroes and heroines, and we all have that. It's just we're so alike, but we direct these prejudices get in a way, and they direct us into such totally different pathways. It's really sad.
Yeah, and that touches on something else I wanted to highlight when he's dismissing this notion of being born gay because there's a lack of a gay gene, as he calls it, which I have to say, doing shows and doing this kind of work with the ACA for the last year, I'm getting really exhausted having to explain to people that genetics is not just like a series of on-off switches. Yeah. I tend to feel like people see the human genome as like a breaker box, and it's just like, turn this one on, turn this one off, and then you get a person at the end. It is so much more complicated than that. There is no gay gene that gets flipped on or flipped off in different people. There is definitely evidence to suggest, as we continually develop our understanding, that there is some genetic concordance, which is to say that when you look at somebody's genome, there is a certain likelihood of their orientation, but it's so much more complex than that. There's not a single gene. There is clusters of thousands of different gene sequences that are involved, on top of environmental factors, particularly hormones in the womb, all of these complexities. I'm not a medical doctor, I'm not a biologist or geneticist, but then neither is he. So my point here is simply that to look at scientists in 2019 or 1999 or 2039 or whenever and say, well, because you haven't found the gay gene, I don't believe that gays are natural, is completely ignorant and misunderstands both genetics and ignores the overwhelming amount of information about same-sex attraction among other species, among our own species. It's just so much more complex than all that.
But if you get into that, though, it becomes a choice. And if it has to be a choice, because God could not have created you incorrectly. You, as a gay person, if we are born this way, we are created as a mistake. We were created and destined to live a life of debauchery, and we were created to go to hell because we chose this. That's where it comes into. That's where this line of thinking, at least how I interpret it, this line of thinking. Yeah. A perfect God cannot have created an imperfect individual, because we are created in the image of God.
Yeah. Well, according to the Bible, I don't believe in a God, but that is the way the doctrine goes. What you were talking about actually touches on one of the points that I think is incredibly valuable in responding to this, which is that this is a church and a community that surrounds not just Pastor McMurtry's church, but the NIFB, the larger church, which is that it's not just a specific rejection of that with scientists, it's just a rejection of any kind of validity of the outside world. There is this inside and outside world, and people that analyze and look at cult behavior and the way that it affects people have looked at the NIFB, and it starts to match up with the BITE model actually kind of effectively. The BITE model of I forget the actual title, but it's used to determine and evaluate how much an organization comports with definitions of a cult. not a cult, how much it seems like it is a cult. And it's this complete rejection of like, I have the truth, I had it when I was studying the Bible at age 15. So outside, knowledge isn't really a concept that's valid at all. There isn't learning here, there isn't acceptance. There's as closed a mind as you can get to things outside of church doctrine, which I find as sort of an additional factor of this that is completely tragic.
And what he said was interesting was that, so we were given the knowledge and we've rejected the knowledge, and therefore God has cursed us with this attraction to the hurtful and to the painful.
I mean, I don't even particularly like roller coasters because it's a lot of, I guess, thrilling stimuli, and there's other things I could be doing. So to say that I'm attracted to things that actually hurt me, nope.
You haven't been on the right roller coaster then.
Well, I don't even really like heights that much either. I deal with them now, but
I joined the Air Force and I'm scared of heights. Go figure.
What did you do in the? Well, okay.
I was a medic.
All right. Well, it's good.
4 years Air Force.
Let's see. I was taking some extra notes. Yeah, he also uses this word normal in past clips and past episodes, and probably in the next episode as well, if I'm remembering it correctly. But it's just an idea of like you said, the gut response solidified in, well, no, the Bible says this, I'm correct.
As an author, I love using the term normal because there's so much direction you can go with it. My definition of normal, as I've written in one of my stories, was normal is what everybody else is and you are not.
Yeah, that's a fair consideration. I think there is a lot to be said about the sort of insular nature of the culture, and I think a lot of his ideas come from this notion of his experiences. So I think that that's really worth diving into. I think the next clip even sort of sets that up a little bit better if we want to do that before we talk too much about these ideas.
I just wanted to make sure that we touched everything on this clip. Well, actually, before we go on, so I can't remember specifically when because there's a lot of churches in the NIFB, but more recently than this interview, Tommy McMurtry was preaching and said that he hopes that LGBTQIA folks feel depressed and, put upon by the world. That's a bad phrase. To the point where they do become suicidal and do actually kill themselves.
I believe he said that he wished that God would oppress the gay community with depression and feelings of self-loathing to a point where they would kill themselves.
So a modern-day God doesn't use locusts, but instead uses clinical depression and suicidal ideations to attack his enemies?
Yes.
That's quite a step up in sophistication.
Yeah.
Is that a prayer or is that a curse?
Yeah, it's an interesting question no matter how you slice it.
Is that witchcraft or is that prayer?
Yeah, let's never mind Catholic ideas of mortal sins, suicide being a unforgivable one, and these different notions. But the reality is, if it wasn't for folks like Mr. McMurtry, I would have a dramatically different job. I would have so much else to do because we wouldn't have to dedicate someone like me to spending a career ministering to and taking care of queer kids, folks who have been hit with these messages. Because while I hate to even give credit, I have to acknowledge that suicide rates are huge in the queer community. I mean, suicide rates among queer kids are 3 times that of the rest of the population. And it's heartbreaking to think that somebody would encourage that somebody would be in favor of that. And when people ask, like, why are we doing shows like this? Why are we combating these ideas? I mean, the general society has started to move on and we're winning the battle anyway. And why be so pedantic and chop up everything that he says into these little segments and discuss? We do it because these ideas are dangerous. These ideas are hurtful. There are so many people who come into my office completely unable to enjoy their own gender, their own sexuality, their own bodies, their own identities because of this type of messaging. And being disconnected from those aspects of themselves leads to things like anxiety, leads to things like depression, leads to suicidal thoughts, and that very often leads to death.
Yeah. And you've touched on like a broader point, which I'd like to address. I mean, this is a huge problem. It remains a problem. That's why things like the Trevor Project still exist, and as they should.
Yeah, and I would like, as we're diving into these uncomfortable topics, to encourage people to look at resources like the Trans Lifeline, like the Trevor Project. These different hotlines have so much more to offer on their websites. You can talk to people over the phone, you can talk to people via text, via chat room. Just knowing that as we're talking about these really uncomfortable things, there likely are people in the audience who are feeling pretty triggered by all of this language. And I don't want anybody out there to feel like they're alone or that they need to give in to those thoughts or to those feelings. Having worked with the National Suicide Prevention Line myself, I can tell you, even if you feel silly or like your problems aren't big enough or whatever else, you really can save lives by accessing these types of resources. So I'll let you continue, but I did want to really encourage people to be aware of specifically the Trevor Project and the Trans Lifeline, but there are a number of other really great resources, particularly for queer kids that are struggling with these experiences. Yeah, and society is changing such that we can have those openly as well. And the point that I was getting to was the way in which society is changing and why. To hear people that are, ostensibly like allies, or at least I think it's unactivated allies is the phrase that I've started using, because yes, they agree with the points, but they don't necessarily agree with any activism, or they don't want to talk about it. Do anything about it.
They're the casual, like, yes, I agree with you. Now let me get back to, my dinner or whatever it is. When people say things along the lines of like, oh, why are you still doing this? We're winning the fight, et cetera. It's like, well, okay, the fight, as that phrase, suggested, is being won, but it's not being won by people that stay home and knit. It's being won, and society is shifting because things like this happen, right? Don't tell me to stop helping because the help is working on a large scale, which is what that sentence breaks down to, right? I don't want to, okay, well, so I like this show and I am passionate about the things that I do to try and help. I'm not trying to take credit for all of the progress that's been made, or, give this show all of the credit for it. Sorry. But the more things like this that are done well, the more that fight, as it's sometimes called, will be completed, and the more progress will be reached, and the less necessary things like this will be. I'm literally working so that, this job doesn't exist. Yeah.
I'd like to become a writer someday, when I don't have to lose sleep over worrying about all of the folks that, are really needing the type of help I'm able to offer.
Yeah. My wish is that this message will circumvent the fight and reach those people who are trapped in these religious institutions or in these environments, and that we can get the message to them that it's going to be all right. Just hold on a little bit longer.
You're not alone.
Right. Just hold on a little bit longer. Just one more day. Every day, wake up.
One day at a time.
One more day. It's going to get better. It's going to be all right.
It does.
There's somebody out there who understands, that believes in you and knows that you are not a sick individual, that regardless of what you believe or who you believe in, you are not created wrong. You are not a mistake. You are not dirty. There's somebody out there who is willing to offer a hand for you.
Yeah. You were not born broken. You were born human, and you're not alone. And I think with that, let me circle back around to one quick point about sort of the unactive allies that exist that can sometimes get annoyed, like, why is the fight continuing, et cetera. And that's because they've been reached, right? Like, well, the specific portion that I'm talking about have been reached. Yes, sure, yeah, there shouldn't be gay bashing or violence, and same-sex marriage. Why are you going on about it? Well, it's not for you, right? You've been persuaded. You understand this, that humans are humans. Cool, good,
Not everybody's gotten that message yet.
Yeah, remember to vote. Not everyone's gotten that message yet, and that's why we're still working on it. And there are still people that feel deliberately, as they are being deliberately oppressed and put down and made to feel less than by society and by institutions, among them the new independent fundamentalist Baptist Church, which is why that is what we're discussing now. I think we've touched on everything from that clip.
Yeah.
Why don't we go ahead and roll the next one?
I want to talk about being born another way.
Okay.
Are you familiar with obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, ADHD, ADD, Asperger's? Do you think people who have these clinical diagnoses are making a choice, or do you think that's a honest medical issue that they have?
Well, and I'm not an expert on that subject, but at the same time, we clearly are coming up with a lot of new diseases and things because everybody's on meds. You go, and if you have a typical healthy, rambunctious, hyperactive boy, and you don't ever discipline him, he's going to get out of control. Now, our society has decided it's better to drug them up than it is to spank them. They think that's better. Well, you start drugging kids up, they're going to come up with all kinds of weird problems. So I'm not saying there's not such a thing as ADD, Asperger's, all that kind of stuff, but I do think a lot of that is drug related. I think if parents would just, discipline their kids biblically, I think that solved the problem. I think probably, my boys definitely had ADD, but they were fine. It didn't hurt them. I definitely never, as a parent, abused them, and especially through drugs. I never did it. But sometimes people have problems that make normal life more challenging for them. So do we throw the rules out the window for them? Do we, if somebody has an explosive temper, do we turn them loose on society and let them beat people up? Or do we deal with it? We force them to deal with that problem, or they're going to be in trouble because we understand what they're doing is harmful to other people. Well, it's the same thing too. Let's just say that somebody, they have a attraction to kids. You know what? That needs to be stopped. That needs to be dealt with. That is a bad thing.
Agreed.
And if somebody is attracted to the same sex, that's a bad thing. They're responsible to control it. So if some dude's out there and theoretically he's attracted to other guys, I don't think he needs to be put to death if he controls himself and doesn't do anything.
Pastor,
for example, I'm a man, and I'm attracted to women, but at the same time, does that give me the right to just go do what I want with any woman that I want? I have no right to do that. That would be wicked for me to go and just sleep around with every woman that I think's attractive. That's not what God intended, and that's not something I should do. And you know what? As a young man, I was attracted to females. I wanted a wife, and you know what? I found one. And I have kept myself only unto her. As we said in the vows, I promise to keep myself only unto her as long as we both shall live. If I see another woman that I think's attractive, guess what? I am supposed to, stay faithful to my wife, and I'm not supposed to just give in to whatever I desire. I might see an item that I want. Some people might be more inclined to steal than others. We're not just going to give them a pass because they've been diagnosed as a kleptomaniac. And you know what? If kids have whatever, they still have to follow the rules of society. It may be a little more challenging for them.
So There's actually a lot of the underlying ideas there that I think I can agree with, which is that
I'm glad I'm not the only one that said that.
yeah, because
But it's so
because if you uncouch those ideas from God and you actually reevaluate the part with same-sex attraction and realize that it's not harmful, you can get and you recognize that spanking is harmful, you can get to pretty much the same conclusions that I have, unless I've probably forgotten a part in here, which is that, we don't throw the rules out the window, I think is what he said, because, a pedophile is attracted to children. We find a way of preventing the harm, and then, we also don't kill people by stoning in a public square. And we find the way to do that, right? Like, we don't throw out the rules because a person has been diagnosed with ADD. We try and treat them, and oftentimes part of that treatment includes medication, which I think, you can speak more to than I can. But we help people, and we make a better society instead of telling people my way or the highway. It's your responsibility to, fix whatever might be ailing you. We help people be part of society, and we've made that society better and more accepting.
Like you, there was some good things that were in there that I can agree with, but it ended in such a weird little place. Like when I was in college, I put myself through college working at inpatient psychiatric wards, particularly and predominantly adolescent and pediatric, and I saw. Or at least, actually, I saw inappropriate use of medication with children with dire results, specifically using the Thorazine or overusing chemical restraints for these kids. And I totally agree. I think that is not. I think that it was a problem and still is a problem. I don't necessarily be willing with spanking, but again, addressing these issues in a way that needs to be addressed. How we jumped from that to attraction of a same sex, I don't get.
Well, it's because he sees that as he wouldn't say as a similar disorder, because he would say that there's a difference there. But it's another thing that he thinks is wrong. or not normal.
And I do like to correct him that where he talked about if he coveted something else, such as another woman, that's not that because he doesn't act on it is okay. According to Jesus, he still committed adultery in his heart.
There's a lot there, but one place I want to start is acknowledging that you're right. I've also worked in inpatient psychiatric facilities. Even out in the community, I fully recognize that there are plenty of folks who are being over-medicated, over-diagnosed, these different concerns that are really worth addressing and really worthy of, honestly, their own show, their own, conversation. But I have to express some concern over this idea that we're dismissing experts for, what worked for me. This notion of the grand conspiracy and like these bigger issues, as if psychiatrists don't know that sometimes things are overdiagnosed or that they're over-medicating. Each individual psychiatrist is working within their own ethics, and we can poke around the edges of that, talk about flaws in the system. But this notion that that he somehow knows better overall kind of goes into everything that we've said today. You can listen back to the entirety of the interview, and if you recall that this is one particular person with one set of experiences who dismisses the larger scientific community, who dismisses outside sources and information, who happen to be born as somebody who is cisgendered, as somebody who is straight, as somebody who is male, as somebody who is white. You have somebody who's been given every advantage and opportunity by being born into a society that was pre-molded and shaped to be very convenient and ready to go. That's not to say that he hasn't suffered. I don't know his life story. I don't know if he had his heart broken in high school. I don't know if his mom got sick when he was in college. I don't understand these parts of him, and I don't mean to pretend to. I don't mean to suggest that he hasn't had a hard life. But he's had a lot of opportunities and a lot of things that haven't been hard, that are for so many other people. And so for him to come from his perspective as somebody who's able-bodied, as somebody who's not suffering from a serious mental illness, and to say, well, yeah, my kids ran around a lot and they were really loud, so they must have had ADD, but because we beat them properly, it wasn't a problem. You know, maybe I really want to rape somebody. I don't mean to put words in his mouth, but that's kind of what I'm hearing in that sentence. But I don't do it, so why should I? He's really generalizing his experience to that of everybody else's.
And he always seems to go to the extremes.
Well, it's
always extremes.
It's that, but that's half of everything he has and everything that has been deemed acceptable for him to use to understand the world. It's what is in your heart, and also what is in your heart should be Jesus as described in the King James Bible 1611.
As we interpret it now.
As we interpret it now, and nothing else. And so when there's something that's not in the King James Bible, like, better and, increasing knowledge about mental health issues and treatment, he has to then rely on what is in his heart, metaphorically. And I think there's a lot of empathy that I hear in his voice. And I think that, in his terms, I don't agree with corporal punishment, but in his terms, he's like, yeah, you're going to mess up kids with drugs. Well, you can mess up kids with corporal punishment, and that's something that he actually in a previous clip has acknowledged is, you're not beating a kid bloody or whatever.
Or for the sake of beating them.
Or for the sake of beating them, right? And it's like, well, you're not giving drugs to a child endlessly, right? You're not laying out, lines of cocaine or whatever for your 3-year-old. We agree there's too much. You can give someone too many drugs, but
there are a lot of things that he said that I do agree with. I do agree that people with certain disabilities or certain types of problems, we just don't give them a free rein. We learn how to help them cope.
Sure.
We don't just take what we want, whether it be physical or a sexual object or sexual desires. But so there's common ground here that we understand, we agree with, and it's common sense, in a civilized society.
Yeah, he agrees with rehabilitation rather than just punishment, right? He's like, he said...
We don't have to kill all the gay people.
Well, I mean, I don't think he has said that.
He doesn't. It's implied when he compares one and then immediately pivots to another.
Yeah.
But you're right. I don't mean to put words in his mouth.
Actually, he does. He would just say that they're not given over to a reprobate, probably, if they control themselves.
Yeah.
But God cursed him with that reprobate mind.
Well, that, I don't know how he rationalizes those two statements, but he said that, my boys had ADD and, it didn't hurt them much, right? So it's like, there was this thing that, in his words, sometimes people have problems and that makes life more difficult. He understands that there are things that are more difficult and that people need help to get there. It's just that his model and the world that he was raised in is all of that is from the King James Bible version, King James 1611 and our interpretation of it, period. And it's like, well, okay, by observing the world, we've learned other things. We've learned how to make medications and help treat people.
See, I don't quite hear that. When I hear him talking about how we don't make exceptions for people based on their needs or their experience, I agree in the sense that, just because somebody has anger issues does not give them a license to kill. You don't have that right, and I fully recognize and appreciate that. But there is a difference between equality and equity. There is a responsibility in a just society to recognize that there are folks who struggle with something more than others and to make some level of accommodations for that. And especially as somebody who's sitting at the top of the heap, as I've described, talking about his race, his gender, and these different things. There's so much dismissiveness to stand at the top of the pile and to say, well, I had the same opportunities that you had, and look at me here. Why do you feel like you should get special treatment or special opportunities or special forgiveness? And it really breaks my heart and frustrates me to see that argument accepted in a modern era, when there is so much opportunity to see how other people live. We have almost everybody, regardless of your financial status or opportunities in modern day America, has access to seeing how other people live in a way that is completely unprecedented. There's opportunity now for somebody in Southern California to understand the life of somebody in Northern Maine that simply did not exist 10 years ago, let alone 200, let alone 2,000. Mm-hmm. And so to not have any empathy for other people's experiences when that information is right there and available, to actively reject it and shun the outside world, to insulate yourself in that way so as not to see or understand it, is callous in a way that I don't see the Jesus of the Bible speaking.
Yeah. I mean, I think that touches on pretty much everything. I mean, they he cited Romans earlier, which, is a letter from Paul rather than Jesus' words, which is why they use the whole Bible instead of just the words in red. But
I think this is the first time he's actually utilized some scripture from the New Testament, because most of it was focused on the Old Testament.
Yeah. Well, I think that's just based on the subject matter. I'm sure there's a lot that they get from the New Testament as well that relates to various other things. Like their soteriology is probably also just New Testament.
Yeah, what I find interesting is that doing research, you can basically find multiple passages in the Bible that are contrary to his state and his position, and maybe one or two that are supportive of Tommy's position. So my question is, how do we know what is right? If we have a book, a divine inspired book that has blatant contradictions of one position, how do we know what is right? How do we find truth?
I mean, if you're asking me,
that was rhetorical.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, because I don't start with the Bible.
Yeah, I frankly read better books, but
right. We don't. But we're not dealing with that right now. We're leader of a pretty horrible radical position that is used in light of in this book.
Yeah, and it's used in a way that hurts people, right? I think that's one of the things. I know that. So it's that I've listened through all of this, and then I think I've also probably immersed myself in more of the preachings and teachings of the NIFB than you have. So to me, being able to contrast his words with theirs, I think I hear more of the no, look, he has like a little bit of compassion and understanding for people that are outside the church, whereas other preachers don't. But like you touched on, he doesn't have the same perspective of other people's suffering because, like it or not, there are things that other people go through that, in his words, make life more difficult that he hasn't. And it's unfortunate that the preachings and teachings that he was raised with, or at least now holds, prevent him from going, yeah, you know what, I should be accepting of other people and try and find a way to help make people's life better, that no one is beyond help, that whether you believe someone is a reprobate or not doesn't mean they should be denied a sandwich if they're hungry.
Yeah, well, he just talks about how everybody, regardless of their needs or their experiences, their mental health, whatever else, their orientation, is responsible to follow the rules of society. And he doesn't really define where those are coming from. I mean, ostensibly, they're extrapolated from the Bible, but certainly there's much more to it than that, because the Bible doesn't have much to say about many, many, many things that are significant in our society. But I mean, it's very easy, again, for him to say that from his position. I mean, if there was a religion that the darker your hair is, the more noble and holy and just and righteous you are, it'd be very convenient for me to look down on the two of you, and Derek and I more so on Jamie. And, you know,
We do that anyway.
well, we do, but for the merits of his character, not the color of his hair.
Have you met him?
Well, okay. All right. So there's a lot to be concerned with. But I guess I just would like to stress more than anything that it's very convenient to stand on the moral high ground and talking about this is right and this is wrong for seemingly arbitrary reasons, because there's really nothing outside of the Bible's existence. If it wasn't for the Bible, there would be no reason to draw these lines. So it's very convenient for somebody to pick this particular book, to adhere to these particular lines, when they happen to be born on this side of the line and not on that side of the line.
Yeah, and I think that touches on some of the things we said earlier, which is like not everyone is born in a Christian country or given the opportunity to be saved. And that is something that I think, you know, isn't considered enough as like, well, what does that say about the claims that this doctrine that I'm preaching make, right? Like if there's a person that doesn't have the opportunities that you have to reach, you know, your position where, you know, for the sake of argument, we're looking at this from his perspective, then how can you blame them for that, right? Obviously saying, well, oh, I have the answers and everyone should because they're right here is easier, as you've said, to say when you're handed the answers, even though I don't agree that you have the answers. I don't know. I cut you off, I think, before you were going to say something.
Just in closing, I want to say, love you.
Yeah, I was going to say, all right, you can attack my character as much as you want, but don't attack my hair, all right? There is nothing wrong with it.
You got a little bit of split ends.
All right.
You know what? We accept you. We understand that you were born this way.
Yeah.
Okay.
You need to condition.
All right. Well, so we're going to have to wrap this up pretty soon because I might have to go out and fight someone. Not actually. We'll just engage in a series of hair flips to demonstrate the lack of merits
whether
of
it's
your
spirited debate or hair flips,
slander.
bring it on. Bring it on.
Well, me and Jamie, we fight like this.
Okay, well, fair enough.
You fight like that. But
thank you guys for having me on.
yeah,
I guess
thank you for
in
coming.
my closing, I just again want to remind folks about resources like the Trans Lifeline, like the Trevor Project, and things that you may feel like leaning on, you know, after an experience like this. Or, you know, depending on where you're coming from, Recovery from Religion is another really excellent project that people might be feeling right now. If you just want to Google that phrase, Recovery from Religion, there are a phone hotline as well as chat rooms and different things for people who are kind of feeling uncomfortable or challenged by what is frankly some pretty heavy and uncomfortable subject matter.
And if we want to continue this conversation, please join in and comment on our YouTube and like and subscribe. And I'm pretty active on there.
press that like button.
Smash
a normal
it.
degree. Okay.
Smash it.
This is another show that's going to get you to break your computer. But so in closing, I'll say that's all the time we have, but we're going to continue breaking down the interview. Please join us next time where we'll have special guest Aaron Raw here with us to break down the next part of it and go without God.